There is an eerie, almost suffocating isolation that comes with driving through a severe midnight rainstorm.
You have to listen to me.
The rest of the world completely disappears behind a thick, heavy wall of grey mist. The streetlights are nothing more than distant, blurry smears of amber light against the dark asphalt. And the only consistent rhythm left in existence is the steady,
Father,
aggressive
let us
slap
explain.
of the windshield wipers.
You cannot keep us out here.
My name is Ethan Vance.
Go away before he
I am
sees
28 years old, and on that specific Tuesday night, I was driving home after a brutal, exhausting 14-hour shift at the studio. My eyes were burning from staring at monitors, my shoulders were tense, and the heater in my sedan was humming a low, comforting tune, trying to keep the freezing outside air at bay. I was just 2 blocks away from my apartment complex, turning down a dark, poorly lit side street, when my headlights suddenly caught a shape on the sidewalk. It was a woman. She wasn't running. She wasn't trying to shield herself from the freezing downpour. She was simply walking, slowly, with her head bowed against the wind, her clothes completely soaked through and clinging to her frame. As my car drew closer, the headlights illuminated her face. It was Clara. Clara was my next-door neighbor. She lived in apartment 4B, right across the narrow, carpeted hallway from mine. For the past 6 months, our entire relationship had consisted of polite, distant nods by the mailboxes, or brief, quiet pleasantries shared while waiting for the courtyard elevator. She was a deeply reserved, hauntingly beautiful girl who always seemed to carry an invisible, heavy wall around herself. But seeing her out here, completely defenseless, against a storm that was tearing through the city, something inside me shifted. I instantly pulled over to the curb, hitting my hazard lights. I leaned across the passenger seat, threw the door open, and let out a loud shout over the roaring sound of the rain. "Clara, get in! You're going to freeze out there!" She stopped walking. For a long, agonizing 3 seconds, she just stood there in the torrential downpour, staring at the open door of my car like it was a hallucination. Then, with a slow, trembling hesitation, she stepped off the curb and slid into the warm fabric of the passenger seat. As she pulled the door shut, locking out the deafening roar of the storm, the interior of my car suddenly felt incredibly small and overwhelmingly intense. She was shivering violently. Her long, dark hair was dripping wet, leaving a trail of cold water across the leather dashboard, and her face was stark pale, except for the deep, dark redness around her eyes. She had been crying, not just a few quiet tears, but the kind of heavy, exhausting weeping that leaves a person completely hollowed out. "Ethan," her voice was incredibly small, a fragile, breathy whisper that barely carried over the sound of the heater. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I didn't mean to ruin your car." "Don't worry about the car," I said softly, shifting the vehicle back into drive. I reached into the back seat, grabbed my thick, dry winter jacket, and gently handed it to her. "Put this around your shoulders. I'm taking you home. We're just 2 minutes away." She took the jacket, pressing the warm material tightly against her chest. But as I started to accelerate toward our apartment building, she suddenly reached out. Her cold, trembling fingers brushed against my right hand on the gear shift. A sudden, electric touch that sent a jolt of pure awareness straight up my spine. "No!" Clara whispered, her eyes staring blindly through the fogged-up windshield. "Please, Ethan, don't take me back to the building." "Not tonight. I can't go back there." I slowly let off the gas pedal, pulling the car into a quiet, dark alleyway beneath a brick warehouse. The engine idled quietly. "Clara, look at me," I said, dropping my voice into a low, grounding register. She slowly turned her head, her grey eyes wide, glassy, and completely exposed in the dashboard light. "You're freezing. If you don't want to go to your apartment, tell me where you need to go. I'll drive you anywhere you want." She let out a shaky, ragged breath, her fingers tightening around the fabric of my jacket. She quieted down, looking away as if she was debating whether to let me into the deepest, darkest room of her life. Finally, she pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from her wet purse and read an address. It wasn't a local street. It was an address located across town in Oak Ridge Estates, the most exclusive, obscurately wealthy gated neighborhood in the entire valley. "I need to drop off a key," Clara whispered, her voice dripping with a bitter, painful resolution. "I need to give it back to someone and finally end a lie that has been killing me for 5 years. Before I shift this car back into drive and take you down a road that completely dismantled my entire understanding of my own life, please take a brief, quiet second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely love deep, slow-burn narrative dramas. Also, drop a comment below letting me know the exact city and local time you are listening from. I personally read every single one of your entries while constructing these stories. Now, let us look back at the silent 6 months that led to this midnight storm. To truly understand the weight of what happened when we reached that address, you have to understand the silent history that existed between Clara and me, long before the rain ever touched her shoulders. I moved into apartment 4A 6 months ago, searching for a quiet, isolated space where no one knew my name or my family's history. 5 years ago, my family had been completely torn apart. My parents had a beautiful, seemingly flawless 30-year marriage, the kind of foundational love that my younger sister and I anchored our entire world upon. But it was all an illusion. One random Tuesday afternoon, my mother packed 2 suitcases, left a cold, legal letter on the dining room table, and walked out of our lives forever. She hadn't just fallen out of love. She had been maintaining a secret, highly calculated affair with an immensely powerful, incredibly wealthy married man across the city. The scandal didn't just break my father's heart. It completely destroyed his spirit. He suffered a massive, stress-induced breakdown that left him physically frail and emotionally hollowed out. He lost his business, his dignity, and his smile. My sister and I tried to piece our family back together, but the damage was absolute. The worst part was, the man who stole our mother away used his immense legal wealth and high society power to completely erase his name from the public fallout. He remained a ghost, an anonymous, faceless monster who ruined my father's life without ever having to look his victims in the eye. I carried that burning, quiet rage inside me every single day. It was a heavy, dark anchor that prevented me from trusting anyone or letting anyone get close to me, until Clara moved into the apartment directly across the hall. She was an illustrator, an artist who spent her days working from a small desk near her window. From the very first week, our paths crossed in the most mundane, ordinary ways. We would meet by the garbage chutes at 8 a.m. or pass each other in the concrete courtyard after dark. But there was an undeniable, heavy magnetic pull between us that neither of us ever dared to put into words. Sometimes we would stand in the slow, rumbling elevator together, the silence between us so thick it felt physical. I would look down at her hands, noticing the delicate, paint-stained structure of her fingers. She would look up, her calm, piercing grey eyes catching mine in the mirror reflection. It wasn't a playful, romantic flirtation. It was something much deeper, a mutual, silent recognition, as if we both recognized that the other person was carrying a profound, unspoken grief. There were tiny, unusual details about her that I should have paid more attention to. I remembered a day 3 months ago, when I accidentally dropped a stack of mail in the hallway. Clara had rushed out of her apartment to help me gather the papers, when her hand brushed against an old envelope addressed to my father. She froze, her face turned entirely pale, her breathing hitched, and she stared at my last name, Vance, with an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. At the time, I thought she was just startled. I thought she was just an introverted, anxious soul. I had absolutely no idea that she hadn't ended up in apartment 4B by accident. I had no idea that she had spent the last 6 months living across from me, watching me, learning my habits, and letting herself slowly fall in love with a man she was strictly forbidden to ever look at. The drive to Oak Ridge Estates took nearly 40 minutes through the worsening storm. Inside the car, the atmosphere was thick, suffocating, and intensely intimate. Clara sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, wrapped completely in my oversized grey jacket, staring out at the blurred tail lights ahead of us. The scent of rain, wet wool, and her faint, sweet perfume filled the small cabin. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the deep, rolling thunder that shook the valley. "Yeah, Clara? Why did you pull over tonight?" She didn't turn her head, but I could see the reflection of her grey eyes trembling in the side window glass. Most people in our building, they just keep driving. They look away. I took a deep breath, my left hand gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Because it's you, Clara. I've spent 6 months watching you carry a mountain on your shoulders, and tonight, it looked like that mountain finally broke you. I couldn't just leave you in the dark." A heavy, heartbreaking silence filled the space between us. Clara slowly lowered her legs, turning her entire body to face me in the dark passenger seat. She reached out, her small, warm hand sliding across the center console, her fingers stopping just an inch away from mine. She wanted to touch me. She wanted to lean into that comfort, but there was a profound, invisible barrier holding her back. "You are so much like him," she whispered, a tear finally breaking free and running down her pale cheek. "The way you talk, the way you care about people without asking for anything in return." He told me you were strong, but I didn't believe him until I saw it myself. I frowned, switching on my turn signal as we approached the massive, stone-arched entrance of Oak Ridge Estates. "Who told you I was strong, Clara?" I asked, a sudden, uneasy knot forming deep in my stomach. "Who are you talking about?" "The man who built this prison," she said, her voice shifting into a cold, hollow tone as she looked out at the massive, multi-million-dollar mansions lining the pristine, private avenue. We pulled up to the specific address she had written down. It was a staggering, colonial-style estate hidden behind high, black iron gates. The property was illuminated by expensive, soft golden landscape lighting, casting a surreal, theatrical glow over the manicured lawns and the heavy, downpouring rain. Clara reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy, brass front door key. She stared at it with a look of pure, absolute loathing. "He thinks he can control everything with his money," she whispered, her lower lip trembling violently. "He thinks he can buy people's silence, buy their lives, and cover up his sins by burying them in luxury. I've been running from this house for 5 years, but tonight, I'm giving him back his final string." She reached for the door handle, but her hands were shaking so severely she couldn't even get a grip on the plastic lever. Her breathing became fast, shallow, and panicked. She was physically fainting under the sheer emotional terror of stepping onto that property alone. "Hey, look at me," I said, reaching out and firmly holding her shoulder. "I'm coming with you. I'll hold the umbrella. You don't have to face this alone." She turned to me, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate panic. "No, Ethan. You can't come up there. Please. You don't understand. I'm not leaving you to collapse on a porch in the middle of a storm, Clara," I said firmly. I grabbed my large umbrella from the door pocket, stepped out into the roaring deluge, and rushed around to the passenger side. I opened her door, placed my hand gently under her arm to steady her, and pulled her close against my side under the wide canvas canopy. Together, our footsteps echoing loudly on the slick, slate stone tiles, we walked up the grand staircase toward the massive, double mahogany front doors of the estate. We stood beneath the wide, sheltered portico of the mansion, the rain hammering heavily against the copper gutters above our heads. Clara took a final, deep, shuddering breath. She didn't use the brass key. Instead, she raised her fist and slammed it against the heavy wood. 3 loud, echoing strikes that sounded like gunshots in the quiet neighborhood. We waited for 10 long, agonizing seconds. Then, the heavy brass lock turned with a deep, metallic click. The massive mahogany door slowly swung inward, revealing a grand, marble-floored foyer lit by an enormous, glittering crystal chandelier. Standing on the threshold was an older man. He was in his late 50s, wearing a tailored charcoal luxury robe over an expensive silk shirt. He had silvering hair, a stern, commanding posture, and the cold, arrogant face of a man who was accustomed to ruling every room he walked into. He looked down at Clara, his jaw tightening with an expression of severe, parental anger. "Clara," his voice was a deep, echoing baritone, smooth, but completely devoid of warmth. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Your mother has been frantic. You disappear for 6 months, refuse my checks, live in a disgusting, low-income apartment across the city, and then show up at my door, drenched like a beggar." Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, raised her arm, and dropped the heavy brass key onto the cold, marble floor at his feet. The metallic ring echoed sharply through the grand foyer. "I'm done, Dad," Clara said, her voice completely steady, hard as stone, and filled with a terrifying power. "I'm done carrying your shame. I'm done letting your money buy my silence. I am never using your last name again." The older man frowned, his cold eyes narrowing as he prepared to deliver a furious, crushing response. But as he stepped forward, his gaze naturally shifted past Clara's shoulder and landed directly on my face. The moment his eyes met mine, the entire universe seemed to stop moving. The arrogance, the power, the stern composure on his face completely vanished in a fraction of a second. His skin turned a sickly, chalky white, his mouth opened slightly, and his hands began to tremble against the fabric of his robe. He looked at my sharp jawline, my eyes, my posture, as if he were looking directly at a vengeful ghost that had crawled out of his past to destroy him. He staggered back half a step, his breath catching sharply in his throat. "So?" the older man whispered, his voice completely losing its baritone strength, breaking down into a fragile, terrified gasp that barely left his lips. "So, it's you." I stood entirely frozen beneath the umbrella, my heart violently hammering against my ribs. A sickening, terrifying wave of recognition hit my brain like a lightning bolt. I knew that voice. 5 years ago, after my mother had abandoned our family, my father had tried to call her secret lover one time, attempting to understand why his life was being destroyed. The man on the other end of the line had answered, delivered a cold, ruthless, aristocratic warning to stay away from his family, and hung up. I had listened to the recording of that call 1,000 times, burning the frequency of that voice into my soul. It was him, the man standing on the marble threshold, the man who had stolen my mother, ruined my father's health, and shattered my childhood home, was Clara's father, Charles Montgomery. The room began to spin. I looked down at Clara, my mind fracturing into 1,000,000 broken pieces. The quiet, gentle girl who lived across the hall, the girl whose hand had almost touched mine on the console, was the daughter of the monster who destroyed my family. "Ethan," Clara turned to me, her eyes filled with a sudden, devastating terror as she saw the raw, burning rage taking over my expression. She reached out, trying to grab my arm, trying to pull me back from the edge of the abyss. "Ethan, please, look at me. Let me explain. Please." I stepped back, breaking her grip, my hands shaking so violently the umbrella slipped from my fingers, clattering against the stone steps, as the freezing rain instantly came down over my head, soaking my hair and face. "You knew," I whispered, my voice thick, gravelly, and vibrating with a terrifying, quiet anger. I looked at her, my chest heaving. "The hallway, the mail, the ad. You didn't randomly move into that building, Clara. You knew exactly who I was. I found out a year ago, Clara screamed over the roaring sound of the storm, tears pouring down her face as she stepped off the porch, standing in the freezing rain right beside me. I found a file in his study, legal payoffs, your father's name, your name. I saw what my father did to your family. I saw how he used his wealth to ruin you while he stayed safe in this mansion. I hated him for it, Ethan. I hated being his daughter. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out, begging me to see the truth in her eyes. I moved into that building because I wanted to find you, she sobbed, her voice breaking completely. I wanted to see if you were okay. I wanted to find a way to make amends, to give you something back. But then, over the last 6 months, I got to know you. I saw your heart, your strength, and I did the one thing I was never supposed to do. Ethan, I fell in love with you. Inside the grand foyer, Charles Montgomery stood frozen, staring at the two of us standing in the downpour, his worst corporate and personal sins fully exposed under the harsh glare of his own chandelier. I looked at Clara. The rain was washing over her face, the face of my friend, the face of my neighbor, and the face of the family that ruined my life. The line between love, pain, and vengeance had completely dissolved in the midnight storm. Sometimes, the people we let closest to our hearts are the ones holding the weapons that caused our oldest scars. Now, I want to ask you a direct, serious question. If you discovered that the person you were falling for was the child of the person who ruined your family, would you walk away forever, or would you stay, realizing that they are carrying the exact same scars you are? Write the word walk away or the word stay in the comments section below. I want to read your personal thoughts on this kind of emotional weight. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more long-form, 20+ minute social dramas, and check the description for your next project update. Thank you for listening until the very end. I will see you in the next video.